So we will start right away because we realize that 10 minutes are a bit short. So we will talk about trade-offs between carbon storage, crop yield production, and water supply at the global scale. So, of course, you are working in that field, so you realize that we have immense pressures on the Earth's land surface. We need the land for housing, for industry, to produce food, but also we need to get land apart to conserve it, be it for the reasons of biodiversity, for carbon storage, or recreational purposes. So we have a land use that developed over centuries. If we think of this now, this nexus, how do we use our land? If we think of this on the concept of ecosystem services, then the question would be, is the land use that we currently have, is it optimal in terms of ecosystem service provision? This was the question that we had for ourselves, and we tried to develop a concept how to address this question. So the study objective was actually to optimize global land use towards the provision of three services, that is carbon storage, the food provision, and water supply. The objective was to identify land use allocations on global scale that can be considered optimal for these services. And from this, of course, selective point of view, our research questions were, where should croplands and natural regions be? Then where should we grow which crops? How does the current ecosystem service provision relate to these optimal land use allocations? And based on this, can we explore possible pathways? Where can we do better? Where can we easily adapt so that we do better? So that was our agenda. A bit ambitious maybe, but we just started and see with what we come up. So for deriving ecosystem services on the global scale, we used the dynamic global vegetation model, and you might have seen this schematic already. So the LPJ gas vegetation model, it based on input parameters such as climate variables, atmospheric CO2, and the land use. LPJ gas models how vegetation grows, how land vegetation grows, and it does that in daily processes for the fast plant processes like respiration, photosynthesis, and annual processes are normally like ecosystem dynamics, like the mortality of plants, the new establishment of plants, the biomass allocation. And what we get out of LPJ gas is actually ecosystem state variables like net primary productivity, but also the carbon stocks in soils, vegetation litters, information on nitrogen, crop yields, and water information. So all the cycles that come together in an ecosystem. And here actually we have our three services that we are looking at: the carbon stocks, the crop yields, and the surface runoff. So that was our simulation setup for LPJ gas. We decided that we want to go on a slightly different spatial resolution that you normally use, so slightly decreased, so that we have only 15,000 cells, because we thought the optimization probably already is enough when we do that on that cell level. Then we had different land use options. So we said we want to find an optimal land use for each grid. And the land use option were first potential natural vegetation. That's just the vegetation that would grow there based on bioclimatic limits only. So there would be no land use at all. Then we decided we consider the 5 most important crop types. And these are groups of crops, for example, maize, rice, corn, rice, wheat, soybean, tropical roots. And each of them is like a group of crops. It's not only one crop species. So we did simulations where each one of these crops was planted actually everywhere on the globe. And LPJ gas has a routine inside that determines which crop actually grows there, which works based on heat units that are accumulated on the globe. So it's not like we plant rice like in the middle of the tundra. It just doesn't grow there. So, and the last one that was kind of a reference simulation, the current land use. So what would be the services for the land use that we have at the moment? So we set up these different land use options, ran LPJ gas and derived ecosystem services directly from the outputs, and then additional data come in. That's first like the irrigation water availability, which we used an existing study that provides how much water would be available for irrigation first now and at the end of the century. So that gave us a fraction here, how much can we irrigate in each grid cell. then we decided, okay, we already have a limitation within LPJ gas, where does a crop grow and where it doesn't, but still we have some very, very low yields that in the optimization process can be selected. So we introduced a minimum yield to exclude the areas where just a bit of a crop is grown. And third, we introduced the protected area network and filled this with natural vegetation. So in our optimization, everything that is protected in a certain category is just excluded from the optimization process. So this is what we started with. Went to our multi-objective genetic algorithm. And our optimization process was finding configurations that do not allow an increase in one service without losing in another service. So what we actually end up with is this so-called Pareto frontier or efficiency frontier. That's a hyperplane, we'll just look at it, of optimal land use allocations. That was our objective from this algorithm. And if we draw this now for two services, so ecosystem service 1 between minimum like 0 and fictive maximum, and the second service, then we have some starting solutions. They are actually random configurations based on our simulations. So each dot here actually gives you a map, and this gives you the total of this service and the second service. So behind every dot here, there's actually a map of land use allocations. So these are our starting solutions. Then the genetic algorithm kicks in, so it combines 2 points, creates a child, and then the decision is if the child is better in ecosystem service provision than the parents. So for example, it would be better than this parent because ES1 is higher and ES2 is higher, so this parent would be discarded and the child would be kept, but this parent would also be kept because ecosystem service 1 is higher. So, and then based on these two, it goes on and on. So, and in the optimization process, the suboptimal solutions are discarded, and it always goes in this direction. And what we end up with is this so-called Pareto frontier. So this is the frontier of optimal solutions. You can't get more optimal than these solutions. But actually, which solution you pick on this frontier, that completely depends on your preferences, if you want more of ecosystem service 1 or 2. So if we have this Pareto frontier, the suboptimal solutions are discarded in the process. We end up with the frontier, and what we can do then is actually draw in the ecosystem service provision under the current land use. So 1 dot, but behind it is a map. And then we can explore possible pathways towards optimal solutions. So how can we go from this dot to this dot? What would we have to change in the land use? So this was what we wanted to. This is how we started, and this was like examples of first results. So surprisingly random. That was an optimization after 4 days, roundabout. So we saw, okay, if we from the beginning optimize on grid cell level, it's not going to work. It could be that we have to optimize forever. So what we thought is a stepwise optimization. The first one, doing it on biome level. 8 biomes on the globe, so 6 land uses, 5 crops and 1 natural. Potential of 8 already gives you 1.6 million solutions. So just to give you a number how computationally expensive this optimization process is. So that was our first step, doing it on biome level, and that worked quite well, and Sven will just show you some results on that now. The second step then would be to do it on food production units. Some of you might know it, that's a combination of economic regions and watersheds, major watersheds. Normally 300 units. If we combine that with the biomes, then we have around 800 units. So that would be our step 2, and that is actually where we are in the moment. So you will see examples of both of that. And the third step then actually would be the optimization of the grid cell level, 15,000 cells. I think it's you now. So that's the introduction, and now you see some nice colorful maps.
1.5.
Nine.
So this is what you get after optimization at the biome level. So I'm always surprised doing the math. You have 8 biomes, you have 6 different crop rotations, when it leads to 1.6 million combinations. Actually, this is not well, not using a genetic algorithm, this is simply kind of doing all calculations. So that's a matter of a few seconds to get that Pareto frontier. Of course, you see the Pareto frontier looks a bit edgy. It has holes in it and stuff like that. So this is why we kind of went to the next level, going through the food producing units, around about 800. And you see in red the original Pareto frontier at the biome level, and in bluish the new Pareto frontier. That was optimized using a genetic algorithm. And you see that the frontier, of course, moved outwards. So we used that point as starting points, as seeds for the genetic algorithm, and then we released the whole thing. So, just as a reminder, each of the points represents a complete grid. So each of the points, I just picked 3 of those, contains a land use map of the globe. So this is the information that is at the globe. But we kind of aggregate it at the level of the different food producing units. But of course, the calculations for the different ecosystem services are done at the grid cell level. So these are just 3 examples, but each of the points, I think in total it's around about, I think 4,096 different points that build up that Pareto frontier. Each of the points represents a land use map. And each of the land use map, of course, in principle represents an ecosystem, 3 different ecosystem service maps, whether then aggregated to create points. Now, how to interpret the results? If you start with natural vegetation, that's of course the point with the highest carbon sequestration and no food provisioning, since we're just looking at crops. And then if you move downhill from the perspective of carbon, well, basically this means we have more crops. That's the trade-off. But the question is, well, which crop do we place somewhere? That is kind of basically the options we have as a management, putting different crops on different parts of the globe. To make sense out of that, since with 4,000 something points, it's very hard. We thought about forming clusters using a self-organizing map. If you haven't heard about the self-organizing map, it's like a k-means clustering, but it forces the results into a 2-dimensional topology, and clusters that are close to each other but are more similar than those that are far away. So this clustering has been done on the level of the food produced by the different crops. And this graphs basically show, since we have 8 different biomes at the biome level, 5 different crops, so kind of 40 variables where we clustered on. That means each of that point represents, for example, corn in the tropics. And you see, basically these solutions down here, they have a relatively high production of corn in the tropics. These solutions up here have a low production. In general, these are the points that have a low food production and have a very high amount of potential natural vegetation there. We could go into some details, but I'm leaving that. Basically, this is showing you what's behind the self-organizing maps. So basically, this is showing you for the different crops, wheat, rice, corn, and so on, and for the different biomes, the level of food produced by them. The idea is now to use that to map that on the frontier, basically indicating which type of crops are used, well, to create the different points. Because this, of course, helps for the interpretation. What we see here, well, this is ongoing, but first thing we see that the different patches are more or less, well, they are clearly defined, they are separate. There are some points jumping across, but basically they are kind of larger regions. That kind of course, helps for the interpretation, because this means we are not kind of changing from one point to the next one, kind of switching completely the crop rotations on Earth. That means we can actually make sense out of it, solutions. For shortage of time, conclusions already. Well, I hope we convinced you that this is working. You can get at least some fancy looking graphs with that. And that the clusters, well, suggest a distinct but smooth pattern that kind of, well, will lead to further interpretation.
And now we are just finishing with a brief outlook. What we want to do is, the next step is now having a look at maps for each cluster. What is the majority of the crops that define the cluster, and where is the difference? So how is this majority defined? Then the next step is, of course, the cell level optimization, and then also finding possible pathways. How can we do better? Where can we do better of the current land use? Then, of course, you saw this entire Pareto frontier, but of course we need a certain crop supply and we need a certain carbon storage. So there are some regions in the Pareto frontier that of course don't make sense. And of course it also doesn't make sense to evaluate this range. So we want to take care of the realistic range only. Then we think about including like an index, a value of biodiversity, because there was just a paper coming out that would allow us to color each plot on the Pareto frontier based on the biodiversity value that it has. And finally, we want to do this on 2 time steps. Everything you saw now is for present day conditions, but we also want to do that end of century and see how the front changes. For example, under climate change, we have different conditions. And that is just playing around. We could evaluate some uncertainty scenarios. What would happen if we have 10% plus minus irrigation water or fertilizer? So we have a long list to do. We have many ideas. If you have more ideas, let us know. If you like it or not like it, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, although you have used your time for questions, I will allow one question.
Thank you.
There's